Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the thematic session on carbon capture, utilization and storage, or CCUS, new focus and persistent challenges. My name is Hannah Ebro, and I'm your moderator for today. We have an exciting lineup of speakers who will give us an overview of the emerging applications of CCUS in industrial contexts and the continuing structural challenges to make CCUS scalable and commercially viable. Please do stay until the end of the session for a brief Q&A, question and answer portion, where you can have the chance to ask the speakers any burning questions you have. Don't worry, the burning questions that you have, any emissions from that, we will capture, utilize, and store. All right? Thank you for laughing at my corny joke. To kick this session off, let's welcome ADB's Energy Transition Director, Dr. Pradeep Tarakan, for his welcome remarks.
Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everyone. This is really designed for people who are far taller than I am, which is kind of surprising. You can hear me, right? Okay. All right. Well, I guess you are the marathoners and triathletes who made it to day 3 of ASIF. So welcome and thank you for your time. Sure we'll be getting more people walking in, although we didn't have a reception last night. Can't blame it on the drinks, no? So welcome, and today we're here to speak about CCUS. As all of you know, carbon capture, utilization, and storage has been long recognized as a really important solution for deep decarbonization, but it's always been elusive. There have been technical challenges, economics, policy, regulatory, behavioral challenges with people not being able to sort of think about. Can you hear me? Is it okay? And so we've been thinking about it and talking about it for over a decade here at ADB. Back in 2009, we were fortunate to have gotten funding from the UK government and from the Global CCS Institute, with which we started a series of engagements across Asia Pacific, starting with PRC. We moved to Southeast Asia and India, engaging on CCUS work. Actually, just want to make a plug. This was a report back from 2010, looking at the prospects for CCUS across the region. If you go on our website, there's a brochure that lays out all the work and reports we've done. And it was hard. I was running around with grant money saying, let's do a pilot. We would even sort of dangle $10 million in front of our clients and say, let's do a pilot. And nobody was interested. There was just no legal mandate. People didn't understand the technology. There was obviously no carbon price. And people just didn't want to bother with it, even if there was grant money. Right? Oil and gas companies and power companies are busy. They were building, and they just didn't see the point. But now, fast forward 15 years, and there's a lot of momentum. We had initially focused on the power sector, and now I think the world has moved on. We realize that that's not really where the low-hanging fruit is. It's complex. In the power sector, it's not that easy to do. It's expensive. You really don't have a revenue model. But the industrial sector is really a lot more interested. CCUS is seen not only as a way to comply with climate commitments, but also a pathway to convert CO2 to much needed chemicals and products. And especially given the ongoing energy crisis, I think a lot of people are realizing it's easy to replace fossil electron for a green electron, but not so easy when it comes to fuels and chemicals. So today we have an interesting set of presentations. We are engaged in India, working with a large state-owned oil and gas major, looking at refineries to look at what CCS options may be applicable there. This work is supported by the government of Japan through the Japan Fund for Prosperous and Resilient Asia and the Pacific. So thanks to them for this support. So you'll be hearing from Dastur Engineering. You'll also be hearing from IEA. Thanks to Suwan for being here, about the global context. They have released a really good report. I recommend you all look at it. I won't steal her thunder. She's going to speak about that. And I hope over the next hour and a half, you'll get a stock take on what's happening globally. You will get a sense of where the prospects are in Asia. And more importantly, I think we really need to start looking at 1 or 2 projects. And these projects aren't easy to do. You'll see the amount of public funding that goes into these projects. So we need to find a way to catalyze, bring together the different pieces of funding that's available to try and get one or two projects off the ground in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Central West Asia, say in the next 2 to 3 years. With that, I thank you very much and all the very best.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you for introducing us to ADB's CCUS work, which dates all the way back to when I was in the university. I won't date anyone here. For more information on ADB's initiatives on CCUS, you may download this knowledge product, Decarbonizing Hard to Abate Sectors with CCUS. You may find the QR code here. It's also posted across the room. Right. So let's now proceed with a presentation from the International Energy Agency. The IEA published a report 2 months ago entitled Financing CCUS at Scale. Here to give us an overview of their findings is Sue Tan, head of the IEA Regional Cooperation Center, IEA's first ever office outside its Paris headquarters. Sue brings deep international experience across public and private sectors, and she has held senior climate and energy roles at Shell and the Australian government, and was deputy CEO at Minerals Industry Association and practiced as a lawyer. Let's all welcome Sue.
Clicker. It was your energy, Freddie. So hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our findings from this report, which was done by my colleagues in Paris who haven't been able to fly over, so I've had the opportunity to present it. But it's funny, so I started looking at CCS I'm going to date myself, in 2005, and it was in the power sector in Australia. So it just goes to show how long CCS has been talked about, but hopefully I agree with you, Pradeep, that we can get a bit of momentum and move it from here. I will need a clicker for my slides, unfortunately, but I can, if you put the first slide up, I can just start talking and then we can go from there. So as Hannah mentioned, we released this report. It's available on our website, so please do go and have a look at it. I don't have the little smart QR code, but it's pretty easy to find if you just click it into the IEA homepage. So what I'll try and do today is cover a little bit of the findings from the report, identify some of the recent challenges we've seen, but I do want to start on a more positive note in terms of setting the context. Can I just have the first slide, please? Brilliant. Okay. So if we're starting where we are today, the growth in CCUS capacity has been steady, but relatively limited, as a lot of us know in the room, in the last 2 decades, standing at around 60 million tons of CO2 today. Brilliant. Thank you so much. This is obviously the result of several waves of investment. We had the first wave in the early 2010s, where CCUS at that time was poised for a major expansion as a result of public packages to address the financial crisis, but where actually in the end, we had very few projects reached commissioning after several countries withdrew their support. We then had a second wave after 2020, where again we saw investments pick up, driven in part by growing corporate climate commitments. But that second wave is much larger than before, as investments has yet to materialize in operational capacity. In just the past 2 years, there have been over 30 projects reaching final investment decision. And as a result, there is now roughly as much capacity under construction as is currently in operation. And after years of incremental progress, there could be a step change in deployment for CCS. In addition to being larger than before, the wave is also a lot more diversified by sector, which Pradeep also mentioned, and this is indicated by the different colors on that second graph. We're seeing now projects in industry, in the hydrogen-based fuels, in carbon removal, in CO2 transport and storage infrastructure, and also in good news, at levels not previously seen. And there is even more in the pipeline, as shown now on the graph on the left-hand side. Around 90% of projects have yet to reach a final investment decision. And so the key question that we wanted to look at as part of our report was trying to understand how can governments and financial institutions help create the right conditions to bring much more of these projects that we see into operation. So let's talk a little bit about some of the risks that CCUS projects face. We know that they are inherently complex, they are difficult to finance, and they have exposure to some quite unique risks. The CCUS value chain brings together multiple technologies, regulatory systems, and commercial actors, each with their own distinct risk profiles. At its core, the challenge for CCUS is commercial viability. Unlike other clean energy technologies, CCUS manages CO2, which is a product with little intrinsic market value and limited demand. This can create significant inherent revenue uncertainty across the entire value chain, with each segment relying on different and often fragile business models. On top of this fundamental challenge, there are distinct risks that come into play. When business models rely almost exclusively on policy support, changes in policies then pose very significant threats. If we then look at the construction, operation, and performance side, like all major infrastructure projects, there are inherent construction and operation risks that developers and financiers are used to, but they are made more acute because we have a limited track record in this area. Although it is growing, with more than 9,000 kilometers of CO2 pipelines and over 70 large-scale capture facilities in operation, projects do remain relatively bespoke, and some of these risks have limited real-world precedent. Long-term liability for stored CO2 underground is also often one of the risks, and it raises questions about how can we allocate the risk and ensure that over time and over a longer period. And then finally, of course, there are cross-chain risks. A chain is as fragile as its weakest link. As business models develop around hubs, project developers must coordinate across capture facilities, the transport elements, the infrastructure there, the storage side, across a connected value chain, creating often quite complex contractual relationships. And so how do we now think about these factors in terms of the risk assessment and a financing perspective? Let's have a look first now at some of the public funding options. We are seeing, very importantly, public funding playing a continued critical role in pushing CCUS projects from concept to deployment. In the past years, a record amount of public funding has been earmarked for CCUS globally. This has helped to catalyze private debt. More than USD 15 billion in commercial debt has been raised over the past 2 years, primarily through a handful of landmark project finance transactions, which has emerged as a model for firms to preserve capital and distribute risks. But this model is demanding. It requires very clear contractual frameworks and predictable revenue streams to satisfy lenders. And as we see that countries with the strongest support have begun to be able to attract more of that private capital. And if we look among those countries, it is the United Kingdom that stands out, making up a significant share of this total, with a single large-scale financing deal in 2024 exceeding USD $10 billion. But we've also seen some notable transactions in other jurisdictions, including Sweden and the United States, which reflects that growing appetite from lenders where revenue support and risk allocation frameworks are sufficiently robust. However, despite these positive signals, debt financing remains highly concentrated in a few jurisdictions and sectors, and the current pipeline of deals is still too limited to constitute a broad market trend. Scaling up beyond a couple of deals will therefore rely on continued government support for emitters to decarbonize. Public support can take different forms, and we are seeing variations in different regions in what support looks like, which has been an important impact on the types of projects that get financed and how they end up being financed. So let's start with the North America first, which accounts for about 40% of capacity in operation and under construction. There we have tax policies and existing oil and gas infrastructure and industry are helping some of these segments to move forward commercially. While early projects require a large amount of public funding, as was the case, for example, for the power project Petra Nova, or a dedicated storage site like Quest in Canada, we are seeing private capital starting to scale in segments like bioethanol CCS, where projects can stack incentives with carbon credits, and financiers and industry are more comfortable with risks in general, thanks to experience with oil and gas, as exemplified by the Trailblazer CO2 pipeline, which has served multiple bioethanol producers. Outside of these markets, however, financing does remain difficult, particularly for higher cost applications such as industry and power. If we now look at Europe, public funding has also evolved from large grants to long-term de-risking government frameworks in the form of carbon contracts for difference and risk capping mechanisms, which is helping some of these complex projects move forward, including dedicated transport and storage infrastructure, as is the case in Norway, but also in the UK and in the Netherlands, or we also have the carbon removal projects in Sweden. This has allowed more private capital to flow. And thanks to this shift in support, the region now represents around 12% of global carbon capture capacity and 17% of storage, again showing some clear acceleration after years of limited progress. I think what's important to highlight is that role of technology learning obtained through first-of-a-kind projects in Norway and North America, which is helping to build the confidence for this new generation of projects in Europe. And then if we look at the rest of the world outside of North America and Europe, we are seeing projects going ahead, but they remain in large part tied to oil and gas activities, either through state-owned companies like in the Middle East and China, or some of the large private and gas sponsors in Asia Pacific. Just to now have a little look at some of that different approaches to risk allocations, what we've seen in all of these successful projects really is that critical element around how we allocate the risks and mitigate it across the value chain. So risk mitigation in CCUS projects take multiple forms and operates at different levels. Public frameworks, reduce unpriceable tail risks, contractual structures allocating commercial risks, and project design choices, which can strengthen confidence in delivery. Recent CCUS investments show that partnerships are an effective delivery model for managing that project complexity and those risks. And these can be done between private entities, like we've seen in North America, where many risks are handled commercially through contractual arrangements, or through public-private partnerships with a varying degree of risk ownership by the government, which is the model we've mainly seen in Europe. If we give first an example of the United Kingdom, which is the first one on the first row, and that is the example which has managed to attract the most private debt so far. Revenue and policy risks are addressed, as I've mentioned, through long-term contractual arrangements, including contract for difference-like arrangements with the emitter. There's a regulated asset-based model for transport and storage, and then you combine them with a force majeure and change in law protections that improves lender confidence. Construction, operation, and performance risks are then allocated contractually among those project sponsors that are private companies and not concentrated on a single entity. Most importantly, the contracts with governments cover a significant backstop to cross-chain risks across the value chains, as well as for those long-term liabilities, which is unprecedented for CCUS. If I can then just mention a little bit on the priorities now, scale for how we can actually start to scale CCUS. It will require aligning business models, policy frameworks, and financial structures. We consulted, as part of this report, financial institutions on what could be some of the lessons learned from some of the recent financing decisions, and we have come up with a few of those actions that governments and financial actors can take today to strengthen project bankability. I'll just unpack a few of these. If we look at supporting bankable business models and viable risk-sharing mechanisms, this remains the single most important lever to attract private capital. This can be done through stable carbon pricing, support for low emissions products, and targeted instruments such as contracts for difference or tax credits. Clear risk allocation among stakeholders is essential, and some risks, such as the long-term storage liability, are likely to require ongoing public backstops in some jurisdictions. The second one is to have a look at the legal and regulatory framework. I think we have an excellent example here in this region in Indonesia, but it does probably take a more regional approach. So the emergence that we're seeing of some cross-border CCUS projects brings into question that regional harmonization of frameworks. And right here in Southeast Asia, the long-term liability arrangement, carbon accounting alignment, and multilateral risk-sharing mechanism may be needed. Third, strengthened risk assessment through data sharing. Operational data is critical for financiers and insurers, and governments have a very clear role in encouraging data sharing from public projects, which can help improve transparency. That early collaboration among developers, governments, financiers, and insurers can help to clarify risk allocation and support the creation of tailored financial and insurance products. And then finally, we need to increase development funding resources to assess CO2 storage. The private capital gap is largest at the early stage of the projects, where few investors and lenders have the risk appetite. So geological storage remains an important source of that uncertainty, and site characterization is costly. And this is where multilateral development banks like the ADB and development finance institutions can provide support to unlock some of that private investment, particularly in emerging economies. Thank you again for the opportunity to share some of the highlights of the report. Please do have a look at the full report online, and I wish you the best with the workshop today. Thank you.
Thank you, Suren, and thanks to the IEA for producing valuable reports such as this. It helps increase our global collective knowledge of innovative energy solutions like CCUS. Thank you. Right, so before I call the next set of speakers, let's have a quick icebreaker to stretch our legs a little bit. May I ask everybody to please stand up? So it's just a simple, we will have very simple mechanics. I will just ask a series of questions, and if your answer is yes, you remain standing. If your answer is no, you may take your seats. Don't worry, the questions are not difficult. These are questions about yourself, so there's no right or wrong. So please don't feel pressured, all right? Let's start. First question. Do you know what the CCUS acronym stands for? So if yes, remain standing. If no, you may leave the room. No, just kidding. If no, you can take your seat. All right, so I think most, if not all, know what CCUS stands for. Can we all together say it? So carbon capture. Very good. Thanks for your participation. Second question. Do you know the concept of CCUS? Yes, remain standing. No, have a seat. Okay, so we still take a look at each other. We still have a lot of people standing up. That's good. Third, have you done any work related to CCUS? Any work, knowledge or product, any work? If yes, remain standing. If no, have a seat. All right, so I think we're about half of the room now remaining standing. Fourth question, have you been part of a team or a project that actually captured a single molecule of carbon dioxide? More people sitting down, I see. Okay, so we have only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Emmanuel, am I counting you? No. 6 people in the room left. All right. Final question. Have you been part of a team or a project that utilized or stored carbon? Oh, okay. I'm happy to know that our speakers are standing up. That means that they do have the expertise to share later. So thank you for that. You may take your seats. So this simple exercise just showed us that CCUS is really promising, but we are still a long way from really making it into a reality and a concrete and viable energy transition solution. So to help us know more about CCUS and how it can enable industrial decarbonization, we have representatives from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO, Specifically, the Accelerate to Demonstrate A2D facility. You can also have a look at their standee here in front. So 2 speakers from them. First, we have Dr. Peter Warren, the facility manager of the A2D facility. And prior to working for UNIDO, he worked with the UK government and also has worked with the IEA as a sustainability manager in industry and as a lecturer on energy, climate policy, and climate finance in various universities. Peter will be joined by Bridget Robinson, the project coordinator for the A2D facility, and she is a project and partnerships professional specializing in energy, climate innovation, industrial transformation. And prior to joining UNIDO, Bridget led Reuters' oil and gas market intelligence portfolio, overseeing strategic industry research and insight products focused on the evolving global energy landscape. So let's all welcome Peter and Bridget.
Thanks everyone. We're going to do a bit of a double team stand-up comedy for you. Maybe not the comedy bit actually. But thanks very much to AGB for inviting us to present. It's great to be back as well. I like to come to ASEF and I love the CCUS sessions. I know this is one of the longest running thematic areas in ASEF. It's been going for many, many years and it's great to see how things are changing and progressing, but also where they're stalling. And I think as we heard from Pradeep at the start, how do you get, and from the IEA, how do you get the first projects going? Because that can be revolutionary to this area, you know, going beyond just studies and going beyond feasibility studies, but actually getting the first concrete projects has been the biggest challenge. So we're both here from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. There's also 2 others in the room that are from UNIDO. So Ricardo, who's in there in the middle, and Sabajit, I can see at the back. If you've got any questions, please do go to any one of us 4. Some of the programs I'm presenting on here are also well represented in the room by my 2 colleagues as well, who can answer many more questions on those programs than I think Richard and I can. But the UN's Industrial Development Organization is the main UN agency that focuses on low carbon industrial decarbonization. We have a range of areas that cover things like digitalization, hydrogen that you can apply to this space. But its central goal is sustainable and inclusive industrial development, particularly in developing countries. So what we're going to present today is a bit of context and that we've seen from both some of our work, but also you've heard from the IEA and others as well, before we go into some of UNIDO's work in this space and what we're trying to do to push this forward. But we also wanted to start with a bit of an icebreaker in Mentimeter style. So we'd be just interested to know in your personal opinions, so don't worry whether you have any background on CCUS or not, it doesn't matter. In your opinion, which country in Asia and the Pacific do you think has the highest policy readiness levels for CCUS development? Now, this is completely a personal opinion, so it's not a question where we've got a right answer or wrong answer.
I've also just realized I didn't actually update the question on Mentimeter, so please answer this question, not the one on Mentimeter. I do apologize.
And so what we're going to do is while you're doing that, we're going to carry on with the presentation. Then at the very end of the presentation, we'll show the Mentimeter. Or if we get kicked off stage, then we can show it at the end of the session as well. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to scan the code, and we will come back to the answers a bit later. So to complement what the International Energy Agency was presenting just now, just to give a bit of an overview from some of their work as well, we see about 45 CCUS facilities worldwide, which can be defined as commercial. Most of them, I think, are utilization projects, and many of them are in the industrial sector, the heavy industries. But there are many that are in development. But by development, we mean all parts of the chain. It could be pre-feasibility or even before pre-feasibility study, which would still get captured by these numbers, as opposed to there being 700 projects that are actually in the implementation phase. So that's an important distinction. I think quite a lot of them as well are now sort of shifting, as Pradeep said in the opening, from the power sector more to the industry. That is a big trend we're seeing. But also the way we think about defining CCUS. You know, historically we've thought about it being more about putting some nice equipment on the funnels of industrial factories, but actually CCUS is much broader than that. And we have one case study that we'll present, which is looking at how you lock up within biochar, so the applications of CCUS to agriculture and food processing, which historically haven't often been considered in the CCUS bracket, but actually are an important form of utilization. Maybe if I go to the next slide. In Southeast Asia, there's currently 24 facilities, but as I said, they're not all necessarily operational when we look at the definitions here. Also, I mean, I won't go through the tons, etc., because not everyone understands what that means. I always struggle to know what does 1 ton of CO2 really mean in reality. So I think what's more interesting is looking at where we are on deployment and where we are on planning, implementation, and we're going to present a facility. There's a banner here which can support CCUS projects at the implementation phase, so actually the operation and construction of them. But there's a lot of planning work going on, so there's 12 planned CCUS hubs, and I know the ADB's been a leader in trying to support the implementation of institutes for CCUS at the country, but also regional level. Actually, in my former role, I was working with the ADB on the CCUS Trust Fund, and one of the, I think, exciting pieces of work that was done was to establish institutes in different countries, as I really create hubs for that. But now we're looking at how we go beyond the universities to looking at creating industrial hubs and clusters approaches for CCUS to try and unlock the commercial viability, sharing of resources in the same geographical areas. I probably won't spend too long on this because I'm also looking at the timer and I want to give Bridget the floor in a moment. But we do bring out an annual industrial development report in UNIDO, which covers all parts of industrial decarbonisation and industrial development more broadly. CCUS is a core part of that. It's not the only picture, it's about how it's connected within other solutions as well, but there are deep dives in those reports in the Asia region, for example, in Southeast Asia, on hydrogen production and the use of CCUS. And the growing role in hard-to-abate sectors as well. But I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Bridget, who's going to go more into demonstration projects in CCUS.
Hi, everyone. So accelerating the implementation and commercialization of CCUS technologies is increasingly recognized as vital to achieving global climate targets and sustainable development goals, particularly in hard-to-abate industrial sectors such as cement, steel, and chemicals. The IEA highlights that almost 35% of emission reductions required to reach global net zero scenarios by 2050 will come from technologies that are still at prototype or demonstration phase, a category in which CCUS plays a central role. And this underscores the urgency of moving CCUS from pilot to large-scale deployment. ATD's industrial decarbonisation market assessment further reinforces this point, identifying that approximately 200 decarbonisation technologies, with around 50% of which still at prototype or pilot stage, so TRLs 3 to 7. Within this landscape, CCUS stands out as one of the most researched and strategically important solutions for delivering deep emission reductions in sectors where direct electrification or fuel switching is not yet viable. Despite its significant potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at scale, the deployment of CCUS remains constrained by persistent challenges, including high capital cost, technological complexity, infrastructural requirements, and continued reliance on government and multilateral support. However, momentum is building. For example, CCUS investment in Asia-Pacific region alone is projected to reach about $622 billion by 2050, according to Wood Mackenzie, and signalling the growing confidence in its long-term role within global decarbonisation pathways. To fully unlock the potential, and substantial and coordinated investment is needed alongside the mobilisation of private sector finance. The IEA estimates that at least $90 billion in public funding is required globally by 2050 to bring clean energy demonstration projects, including those for CCUS, to commercial readiness by 2030. So ultimately, scaling up CCUS will be essential to bridging the gap between current emission trajectories and net zero goals, making the acceleration of commercialization a critical priority within global climate transition. Also, be sure to check out our market assessment. There is a QR code at the bottom of our previous slide, but I can imagine you didn't see that because it's probably behind the seats. So be sure to check our website. It's really easy to find. So who are we? What do we do? We're A2D, Accelerate to Demonstrate. We're a grant facility, and we will have started in 2023 and we'll be running to the beginning of 2029 in March, hopefully a bit longer, depending how discussions this event goes. No, I'm joking. Anyway, so we currently have about 85 million USD as a total grant facility, and we aim to accelerate the commercialization of innovative climate solutions in developing countries by supporting catalytic and scalable lighthouse demonstrations. So what do we mean by lighthouse? For us, it means flagship pilot projects that demonstrate innovative solutions in practice and are built so that they can be replicated at large scale. The lighthouse effects also means committing to generating and disseminating knowledge to enable collaboration, learning, and replication. We also have a strong ESS and GESI frameworks, which we require all of our projects to work within. Whilst we are actually quite technology and like kind of innovation agnostic, we do operate across 4 thematic areas, which is industrialization, industrial development, clean hydrogen, critical minerals, and smart energy. So within that, CCUS can actually operate in quite a lot. We currently support 9 projects, of which at the moment receive between 1 and 5 million per demonstration project over a course of 3 years. But actually, we don't have a cap per project. It just happens to be what we are operating within. We're actually also running a call for proposals. So we've run 2 so far. In our first call for proposal, we supported 5 projects. In our second call for proposal, we supported 4, and we're currently running a call for proposals at the moment. It's been running for, it'll have run for about 2 months in total, but the deadline is June 18th. So be sure to check out our resources. Due to strict procurement rules within the UN, the team on site actually can't really discuss it much. However, the people on the screen can. So if you have any questions, send it to them. If you send it to us, we'll just send it on to them anyway. So skip a step. Slide 4. So we wanted to give you some examples of how UNIDO is supporting and developing CCUS. The first one up is one of our own projects, close to our heart. And we think it's a good example of how non-traditional capture technology, which is normally attached to like an emission funnel, but instead is sequestered through biochar. It's also not in Asia, but keeping a global perspective is, we think, important, and we shouldn't forget that lessons and successes can be learned from other regions. The Greener Tea project in Kenya is an industrial decarbonisation initiative focused on producing clean heat and power from agricultural waste. Its objective is to reduce emissions from tea production by 30% by operating a 500 kilowatt microhub gasifier powered by waste biomass, while creating a scalable model for replication across other factories and industries. The project centres on an innovative form of carbon capture and utilisation, where biomass residues such as prunings, crop waste and bamboos are converted into heat and power, supplying up to 20% of energy needs. At the same time, the process produces biochar, which improves soil fertility, increases tea yields, and sequesters carbon. Beyond emission reduction, the project delivers wider environmental, social, and socio-economic benefits, including improved soil health, expanded clean energy use, reduced energy and fertilizer costs, and supports the greener jobs and women participation. In its first year alone, the project reported 692 tonnes of carbon equivalent reduced or avoided, 32 jobs, 22 people trained, of which 50% were women. So slide 2 is a video. We want to watch the first 2 minutes, but perhaps only as we only have 6 minutes. Aye. Sure, we can skip. Delightful. And perhaps we'll go to the next slide if possible. So let's not watch it. We'll give it to one of our project supported by A2D facility. I know. Okay, great. Oh, it's on me. Perfect. Okay, yes, that slide is just further information. So I presume this slide will be sent around, but any information, just head to our website. All those links are there.
Thanks, Bridget. Just for our last few, we have 5 minutes and 38 seconds left on the clock, so we'll try and give more time to other speakers as well. So we'll be a bit quick on these, the final slides. There's some more case studies. We're not going to present them in lots of detail. I think just to give you an overview that UNIDO's got a wide range of ways that it supports countries across the world, including Asia Pacific. So do just come speak to us after. So for example, we're looking at a lot of innovation beyond demonstration as well. So we have a project that's looked at mobile-based carbon capture units. This is very small scale. We're talking very, very early pilots. I mean, there's a photo there. It's the size of the stage, so we're not talking about a large scale. Whereas the Kenya project that you heard, that is at commercial scale. It's different kind of technology, but very different parts of the CCUS stage. This was done in Thailand and recently, or is recently about to wrap up. So if you have any questions on this, yeah, please come to us and ask us as well. We also support roadmaps and policy development as well. So that's a big focus as well of our work on industrial decarbonisation. So we're working on a roadmap for Vietnam at the moment, which includes CCUS, but also other technologies as part of that, including feedstocks, industrial electrification, hydrogen as well. The report, I think we don't have a QR code, but we can add one to the slides and then send that round. Complementing pilots, roadmaps and policy work, also analysis is important. It's obviously a highly technical area, but not just technical assessments. It's also important to look at the financial elements as well. In this case, this was a technical study, so it did look at CCUS across the life cycle as well, and this is more of a standard, so we work on standards as well for methodologies, for example, for life cycle assessments in this space. And I think, Bridget, you're covering this one, right? Okay.
So next up, we have initiatives that CCS could be integrated to. So first up, we have the Global Programme for Hydrogen in Industry, which accelerates decarbonisation of hard-to-abate sectors. So currently in steel, chemical, and fertiliser in developing countries. It focuses on establishing renewable hydrogen value chains and replicable green hydrogen industrial clusters, driving sustainable economic growth and local jobs. Current focus areas include enabling policies, reliable standards, and adequate skills. Actually, locally in the Philippines, efforts are focused on building the policy and institutional foundations for green hydrogen, including closing gaps in national roadmaps, identifying priority applications in industry and transport, and supporting development of green hydrogen industrial cluster pilots. In parallel, technical readiness assessments are being conducted for a planned 10 megawatt renewable hydrogen demonstration plant, helping to advance project feasibility and implementation. Next up, we have the Global Matchmaking Platform that connects emerging and developing economies with technical and financial assistance to decarbonize heavy emitting industries such as steel and cement. It serves as a single point gateway where governments raise customized requests for climate solutions. At global level, the project helps elevate industrial decarbonization, including CCUS, as a shared international priority, ensuring it reflects it is reflected in multilateral processes and global climate agendas. Importantly, it supports countries in clearly articulating their specific needs while aligning these with broader global pathways towards net zero. And this is particularly relevant for CCUS, where national strategies must connect with regional infrastructure and global investment flows. The process itself is designed to be country-driven. Governments submit requests, which then is validated and shared with a global network of delivery partners. And these partners express interest, and countries ultimately select those that are best suited to support implementation. And beyond matchmaking, the platform also serves as a hub for knowledge exchange, facilitating collaboration, sharing lessons learned, and supporting joint learning through events and workshops. To date, the platform successfully has matched over 30 projects requests across 11 countries, with support of 25 international partners providing technical and financial assistance. In Asia Pacific specifically, we are already seeing engagement in countries such as Indonesia, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand, demonstrating the platform's relevance to advancing CCUS and broader industrial decarbonization efforts in the region. And lastly, success. We are also building on this with the Net Zero Partnership, which provides more targeted hands-on support to countries as they move from planning to implementation. The partnership focuses on key hard-to-abate sectors again, such as steel, cement, and concrete, where CCUS will be essential to achieving deep emission reductions. Its support is structured around three key areas. First, helping countries create the right policy and regulatory environment for industrial decarbonisation. Secondly, working directly with industry implementation solutions and development projects that are ready to invest in. And third, fostering international collaboration and knowledge exchange. The key component of the programme of the NDC 3.0 support package, which helps the countries strengthen their climate commitments, translate them into actionable plans, ultimately attract investment while creating jobs and economic support. Crucially, the partnership focuses on pipeline development, transforming technical feasibility solutions, including CCUS applications, into bankable projects that can access finance. Overall, the net zero partnership helps bridge gaps between ambition and implementation, ensuring technologies like CCUS move from concept to commercially viable bankable deployment. Done. Okay.
Okay. We actually had a few more.
Thank you so much for that duathlon. The demonstration projects and case studies that you showed us are really interesting, and I think these are really helpful and critical in supporting to unlock and overcome barriers to CCUS deployment. So thank you, UNIDO, for this work. And again, as what they said, if you need more information about the case studies, feel free to approach our UNIDO colleagues in the room. Next, we will have a presentation from Dastur Energy on how CCUS can support decarbonization in the oil and gas sector in India. It will be a tandem presentation once again. So we have Shukarsha Das, Principal Energy at Dastur, who has 19 years of experience in emerging energy and process technologies. They have led projects on CCUS, coal, and petcoke gasification, chemical complexes, specialty chemicals, and APIs as well for clients across India and overseas. Co-presenting with him is Principal Consultant Debarco Chakraborty. Debarco leads business consulting and strategy at Dastur and focuses on clean energy transitions for industrial sectors such as oil and gas, metals, cement, steel, and including clean energy value chains of solid fuel gasification, hydrogen, methanol derivatives, and energy storage. Let's give a round of applause to Shakarsha and Debarka from Dastur.
Hello. Yeah. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Here today we are going to discuss on the this carbon capture, utilization, and storage options and feasibility study. What we have experienced during our working with ADB for a part of India, which is the northeastern part of India, and mostly we have targeted the hard to abate industries, and here we have located basically the refineries to study with. So to start with a little introduction of our organization, means we have started our journey as those two group of companies almost 70 years back with our experience and means consulting credibility with metal, steel, and other mainly metal industries, means steel and non-ferrous industries. And then after 10 in last 10 years we have diversified also in emerging process technologies, clean energies like CCUS and all other things, and also in the field of chemicals, APIs, and other sectors. So here our major portfolio, what we are discussing about is decarbonization, and mainly we have targeted the hard to abate industries where basically the process is related, and there are technical as well as financial implications while taking the feasibility for the decarbonization across these hard to abate industries. We have targeted steel, power, cement, and also these refineries. So here is our presence and our working gamut. I mean, we have our major technical center in India in the eastern part, and also our major offices in Delhi, and we have our head office in US, Austin. And we have our global presence across Europe and across Middle East also. So from there we operate, and also we support our clients all over the world. So here we started our journey with CCUS, mainly we can tell with USTDA and with Indian Oil. So this was the first one is a USTDA based, means USTDA funded program of assessing feasibility of carbon capture and utilization from one of the major refinery in India, which is in Gujarat, of Indian Oil Refinery. And there we have studied the means carbon capture from their AGU tail gas. And thereafter, we had also been associated with a large project which is associated with ADB for northeastern India, which is a major point of discussion today. And that is basically involving their 3 refineries in the northeastern Indian region, that is Digboy, Guwahati, and Bongaigaon Refinery. And means we have studied their inventory, we have studied how to capture carbon in a techno-economic feasible way. And there also means, other than this, we have also worked with other global CCUS project funded by Department of Energy and in US. And there we have worked with Air Liquide, Duke Energy, and also in India we have worked with Steel Authority, we have worked with Climate Policy Initiative, and also ArcelorMittal across the world for the CCUS part. And in India, means we have helped our government, our Niti Aayog, that is the Planning Commission of India, to frame out the policy and the technology gap, and the viability funding program, which is to be now coming into consideration for CCU and also for CCS. And we have also prepared a report for our Power Ministry, means in the G20 presidency of India in 2023. So here is our journey, and there I am just jumping out to the project what we have done for ADB for last 2 years. We had been associated with ADB for last 2 years for this project in Indian refineries, which is basically run by Indian Oil, means in our case. So it's basically the refineries which are run in India, mostly led by these 8-9 big Indian oil conglomerates, and mostly led by Indian Oil and Reliance. And if you see the total refining capacity of India is around 250 MMTPA, and from there we are seeing around 250 to 260 MMTPA of carbon dioxide emission every year, and which we have found is almost 7 to 10%, means it depends, it varies, but it's almost 7% of the total India's GHG emission. And also if you see the project path now, almost 50 to 60 MMTPA refinery expansion is expected in next 5 to 6 years. So conglomerating all these things, the total emission from Indian hard to abate industries we are seeing is likely to be doubled in next 10 years. And here we are also getting our governmental support, means what I have said, means we have also worked with Niti Aayog, and they have now also come up with a plan, like some policy initiatives, and then some viability gap funding, and their CCUS comes into play in India. And here basically if you see the CCU project design for a large refinery which has definitely a complex configuration, first what we need to do, means what we have done for the India Northeastern Refinery is inventory analysis, means different refineries having different configuration, but in Indian case what we have mostly seen, these are having some distillation unit, these are having some power plants, these are having some hydrogen generation units, and some heaters, and some other auxiliary equipment. And also there is a major part which is also basically a process plant, which is FCC. So what we are doing there, depending on the CO2 intensity, which is the CO2 partial pressure in the emission gases, and also the volume, we are taking care of the emissions in one-by-one manner, means in a techno-economic feasible way. Means if we want to go for capturing almost say more than 60% or 70% of the total refinery emission, it may not be totally technically or economically feasible. So what we have seen in Indian refineries, or in any case also in across the world, we have seen if we target the HGU part and also the FCC part, we are basically being able to capture almost 40 to 45% of the total emission, which is, and this emission is also having some good partial pressure, say around 25 to 30% is having this CO2 concentration, which is actually techno-economically feasible to capture. And then means we have talked to the client, we have done visits, extensive visits to those plants, and we have started all the means feasibilities, technical feasibilities from layout point of view, from inventory point of view, and thereafter we have come to the conclusion like that. Means we can capture first the CO2 from the FCC and HGU mostly, and then to convert it to renewable methanol by integrating green hydrogen, which is basically electrolyzer based hydrogen using renewable power. There we are using one concept, and we have talked to power industries also. Means there is a renewable grid, renewable power grid, which is now conceptualized across India, and based on that we are considering basically the operation of the electrolyzer, and then using that hydrogen and the captured carbon dioxide, we are proposing this conversion to methanol, and also in some case eSAF, that is sustainable aviation fluid, means aviation fuel. And here we are showing basically the our project configuration of one of the major refinery what we have studied over there. What we are seeing that almost 2,500 to 3,000 tons per day CO2 inventory is available across this particular refinery, and there, after studying the refinery configuration, CO2 partial pressure, we have studied that means almost 40 to 45% CO2 is basically concentrated for FCC and hydrogen generation unit, and thereafter we have considered those units, and then after conceptualizing capturing of carbon dioxide from those units, we have transmitted our study to methanol production with the with coupling green hydrogen from the electrolyzer unit, and then part of the methanol we have also considered for SAF generation over there. So there basically we are supporting our this requirement which is coming through different policy initiative from Europe and from America for the e-methanol for maritime industries and also for aviation industries in the form of eSAF. So this is basically our project configuration, and this basically varies from one to one refinery, but mostly this is same. So across the refinery, what we have studied, it's a it is techno-economically feasible to go for this kind of means 40 to 45% capture. And coming to the commercial part, means the financial analysis part and the policy and market initiative part, my colleague Debarko will be covering those. So I would like to call Debarko here for the policy and market and project economics part. So.
Thanks, Shokashu. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Hello, good morning. Thanks ADB for this opportunity, and by now I believe you've got a basic understanding of the CCUS for the specific project that we're talking. So let me talk about the policies and the markets, and this will probably clear some of the concepts that we have, that how to make CCUS viable. I mean, that's the million-dollar question. We all talk about that it's very costly. CCUS can never be at scale. We also heard from Sue from IE as well that it's really difficult to scale up CCUS across the globe. It is still extremely dependent on funding from various grants from different countries. So let us see how the policies are shaping up. So the first point is that let's understand the markets, because we're looking at CCUS for this particular project about CCU from the point of view of methanol and SAF markets. So first of all, what we are observing is the global markets are expanding. There is a strong outlook for methanol and eSAF, partly because of the global demand of maritime sector fuels as well as for the aviation sector fuels. So if you just look at the left side, we have shown how the global methanol market is expanding. So right now it is about 100 million tons kind of a market globally, and low carbon products is only about 1% of that. But if you look at 10 years forward from now, this low carbon methanol market is going to expand in a big way, largely by the push for the maritime sector. And this is really happening. This is something which is in the present. We are observing a lot of dual engine fuels which have come up in the market, a lot of low carbon methanol being bunkered at Singapore, at Chinese ports, at Korea and everywhere. So this is a real scenario that is going to happen. So this is going to push the demand for low carbon methanol in the future. Now, why I'm saying low carbon? Because there are different variants of it. It's renewable carbon, it's renewable methanol, it's blue methanol, all these part of low carbon. So this definition of low carbon is basically defined by the life cycle emissions basis, and that will come in a moment. So one thing is established that the market is going to grow and we have a lot of demand. Now looking at the SAF market. SAF market also, if you look at the aviation fuels market, it's about 333 million tons of demand globally. eSAF is just about 1 million ton out of that, which is very low, even less than 1 million ton. However, we are observing that the SAF, the low carbon SAF CAGR is going to expand in a big way, again, because of the policy push, because of the market's demand. So what this means is that there has to be some supply which has to come to the market, right? So if there is a demand, there has to be a supply which has to come. But the supply is not that easy because the supply has to come at a certain cost, right? Because there will be very few takers for very high cost methanol as well, eSAF. So one thing is established that the compliance driven willingness to pay is obviously there. We are observing that the SAF and methanol been bunkered at Singapore airports and the bunkering hubs is already touching new levels. And I'm just forgetting the West Asia conflict for the moment, which has led the price hikes. But even if you just discount that particular factor, Singapore is still looking at a huge amount of low carbon methanol and low carbon SAF, primarily sourced from the bio route as of now, from China and other places. But the challenge is that this bio route is not going to scale up that much because it's very difficult to aggregate the bio sources to make the methanol and to make the SAF. So there has to be some industrial CO2 based methanol and SAF which has to come to the market to cater to that demand. But again, at what cost? So we'll cover that part next. So yeah, in the context of the Indian refineries, so there are 4 different sets of policies which are driving the Indian CCU readiness. First of all, this global policy, which I talked about, EU ETS, Fuel EU Maritime, IMO's GHG Net Zero framework, which is, so we all know it's in the doldrums, hopefully it will come out soon, and obviously Refuel EU Aviation. So these are creating the demand, the pull, and the compliance pressure for the low carbon methanol and SAF. Now in the Indian context, if you see, the Indian government obviously, over the last few years, there has been a strong push from the Indian government to push for CCUS projects. So a strong budget policy has come out this year with over $2 billion of funding announcement. Indian carbon pricing is also coming up. Indian markets are also coming up. And there is a strong push for the National Green Hydrogen Mission as well. So what this is helping is to give the CapEx push or the CapEx subsidy support for these projects. Obviously, there are articles if you look at the United Nations framework, obviously there are Article 6 frameworks, there is CORSIA, all these are again helping in unlocking the value from the low carbon market. And again, look at the 4th part, which is the provincial government in India, the regional Assam state government policies. This actually supports in the OPEX parts as well as lowering the CapEx. So there are various incentives like tax incentives, operational subsidies. So these also help the project in a big way. So if you look at the project economics, the first point which is very critical to understand is that this low carbon product has to be called as recycled carbon fuel. And this is the term as per the EU RED III definition, where you have to reach a 70% lower emissions to be called as a RCF. Once you are termed as RCF, you can get the benefits of EU ETS and Fuel EU Maritime, as well as Refuel EU Aviation. So that's the critical piece. And that's why we have to look at the individual component-wise emissions in the entire value chain of CCU. So there is emissions from the inputs, that is CO2 capture requires a lot of heat. There is a requirement of steam. Again, the steam can come from natural gas sources. So obviously there will be CO2 emissions embedded in that. There is a bit of emissions because of the green hydrogen that has to be produced. There is emissions for transport. Obviously there is emissions for combustion as well because the methanol will be combusted at ships. But again, we will get the benefit of that, which is the green part you can see because of the EU RED III regulations. So ultimately, we have to see what is the total emissions on a well-to-wake basis. That's what matters. So if we are within that 70% range, yes, we are RCF. And if we are RCF, we'll get the benefits. So that's a very, very critical part to establish the viable business model. But even though we reach there, there is a strong amount of operational support required and capex support required. So my colleague has already gone through the CCU playbook, which is the left side. You can see the business model, but I will not talk about that. I'll talk about the economics here. So if you see the revenue, now how have we derived the revenue? The revenue is derived based on the e-methanol price and the e-SAF price in the market. The price is basically defined by the willingness to pay by the customers. Now, why the willingness is coming? Because the customers are currently reliant on VLSFOs and LSMGOs, which are the primary bunker fuels, but those come with a carbon premium, because as per UETS and Fuel Maritimes, they have to pay a penalty for the continued use of the conventional fossil waste fuels. So to avoid that, there is an implicit requirement for low carbon variants. And that is why we have established the e-methanol price and the e-SAF price, which you can see about $1,200 per ton and $3,000 per ton. Based on that, we have calculated what could be the revenue for this kind of a project of about 3 million tons of capacity. Yeah, so the revenue is about $500 million. Operating cost is about $320 million, and we have a positive EBITDA. But this positive EBITDA is obviously predicated on the revenue, which is the willingness to pay. Investment is about $1 billion, but here the big catch is that we need a capital support of about 50% of that. And that is where India's CCUS mission is coming to the fore, where the government of India is supporting these projects with a 50% kind of a capital grant. And then the project can become 11% MIRR or about 12% project IRR. So the bottom line is that there is obviously an implicit support of capex and opex required to make CCU viable. There is no doubt about that. We have to believe that over the last 200 years since the industrial development era, we were living in a period of carbon discount. We have to believe that. Unless we put a price to carbon, we will never realize that CCUS is a valid proposition. If we just look at it from economic point of view, then CCUS doesn't make sense. But we have to look at it from a larger socio-economic, political, geopolitical issues. And I think from that point of view, it makes sense, because industries have to thrive and industries have to reduce carbon as well. So yeah, so I think I've summarized everything. We were working on the particular project on a feasibility study, which is completed now. The next stage is the project's feed, and then we will go for implementation. So this is where we are. I won't take any further time, so thank you for this.
Thank you, Debarco and Srakarsha. It was really good to know that there's really growing demands for CO2-derived products like methanol and SAF, low-carbon methanol and SAF, as this will definitely drive and propel the demands for better CCU deployment, and eventually will help enable large-scale emissions reductions in India. Thank you. Our final speaker will elaborate on relevant policy and regulatory requirements to scale up CCUS across Asia. Justin Gunasinghe has 2 decades of experience across gas and LNG markets, energy policy, clean gases. He has been advising governments, donors, utilities, and energy companies on how changing energy systems affect national resilience, investment priorities, and strategies. Justin has held leadership roles in supporting several countries, Ukraine's energy security, hydrogen hubs in India and Uzbekistan, also doing work on hydrogen in Mauritania, and also the UK government for their Brexit negotiations on gases and hydrogen strategy. Without further ado, let me welcome Justin Gunasinghe on stage.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, ADB, for the invitation. I recognize that already, actually, my time is cut from 20 to 15. And if I even go to 15, then I think we're late for the coffee. So I'm going to try and keep it less than 10. Oh no, it's my clicker. Can we get the slides? My slides? We're going straight to Emanuele here. Maybe while I get the slides up. So yeah, I think several of the speakers already have mentioned the role of policy, and I wanted to bring a focus on policy. Thank you very much. Specifically for scaling up CCUS in industrial decarbonization. So traditionally, it's been mentioned already that CCUS policy is focused on essentially oil and gas. CCUS is focused on oil and gas recovery and primarily the power sector. We're moving into this world where it's focused on industrial decarbonization, much smaller uses or much smaller volumes of capture that need to be scaled in order to make a bankable project. So what are some of the supportive policies that might potentially allow us to get where we need to go? The role of policy, just to mention, is really to try to support where you have a sector that naturally is not bankable. Policy needs to step in, and policy needs to try to bridge the gap of investability. So in CCUS, we see these really quite high capex rates, relatively high operating costs. We see this lack of reliable revenue, as the guys from Dastor just mentioned. That's changing with these international policy frameworks around carbon, but it's still piecemeal. I think it's regional, and it's not, I would say, 100% trusted by stakeholders because, as already mentioned, policies change. Support and subsidy programs are there one day, and then the world changes, and then they get taken away or they get reduced. We've seen it a little bit in the US recently, and this leads to uncertainty that deters investment. We see these long lead times that make things really difficult, and liabilities were already mentioned, particularly around the CO2 capture. Has been a problem that policymakers have tried to step into and address. So traditionally, we've seen a range of CCUS support schemes, from something that has a relatively low level of government intervention. We might see kind of incentives and penalties. You can see it here on the left side. It's faster traditionally, but because it's more market-based, you can sometimes have the negative effect that the overall value chain is more fragmented or not completely aligned. And then looking completely to the other side, where you have a kind of high level of government intervention, full level of state control, you can get the more alignment in policy, but it can be slower and it can be more difficult for some of the commercial players. So trying to find the balance, and some of these, the models you see in the middle here are the more balanced models, is what we're seeing from governments, and some of the more successful ones, particularly as Sue from the IEA highlighted in the UK, where there's been quite a movement forward in the last few years with CCUS hubs. So early policy for CCUS, I mentioned, was not focused on industrial decarbonization. It was really focused on these large single developer models, full value chain, often around enhanced oil and gas recovery or enhanced oil recovery. Where this kind of falls short for industry is, well, industry is very different. You have many smaller, more diluted sources of carbon, which makes the economics more difficult. The carbon prices are often too low to stimulate demand for these kind of more smaller, more innovative projects. And then you have many more players in the value chain, many more stakeholders, many different business models that need to be brought together under some kind of common risk-sharing model, common framework, and that's really where CCUS for industrial decarbonization policy is focusing. So looking across the three core uses in terms of cement, we see process emissions dominating, and here really, so cement is traditionally of these three segments, it's the most distributed of all of them. You don't often see the cement plants in the same industrial oil and gas petrochemical complex. Often it will be more distributed. So that's a real challenge. So the policy focus really needs to support around midstream facilitation and potentially even cross-border legal and regulatory frameworks. And I'll give an example in a moment of one of those that's happening in the North Sea. or in Northern Europe. In steel, we see real potential for CCUS on the DRI route and the EAF routes. But here, there's been quite a move towards green public procurement. So the role, particularly in the UK again, of the UK stepping in, placing standards, placing obligations for green public procurement for infrastructure and rail, has helped to scale up the potential for CCUS in steel. And then in petrochemicals, we tend to see these clustered in the traditional oil and gas hubs. You do have concentrated volumes of CO2 that can provide the anchor volume, but the policy support has really focused here on aligning multiple stakeholders. So aligning multiple stakeholders, matching the sources and the sinks, which is often a problem where you have, again, dispersed sources of CO2 that are not integrated value chains. And providing this kind of high support at the beginning that scales down over time where the commercial side of things scale up. A couple of examples. We've mentioned several times already the UK's level of investment around CCUS. So what you have is phase one FID has already been taken for two projects, HyNet Northwest and a project in the Northeast. They're both based around industrial clusters, multiple uses of low carbon fuels. CCUS is integrated with green hydrogen, with low carbon transport. It's stacking multiple benefits upon this infrastructure. And then FID has been achieved here really through government stepping in quite heavily around developing the legal and regulatory framework, managing the risks of leakage or covering the risks of leakage that we already mentioned, providing public grants, public funding, particularly for the midstream infrastructure. So the transportation infrastructure, the repurposing of oil and gas pipelines has been a real focus of the UK government, and the commitment over 25 years is quite significant here. We're looking at almost $30 billion, I think 21 million pounds is the stated investment, of which a large amount has already been committed. The Northern Lights project in Norway is quite different. It is a pan-European project where CO2 will be captured from cement plants and others around the Northern European region. There's dedicated shipping, so the CO2 will be liquefied. Imagine the LNG value chain. You're going to liquefy, you're going to transport, and you're going to put the CO2 back into the store where maybe originally oil and gas came out of. So quite an innovative project. Significant commitment from the Norwegian government around the carbon shipping and storage part. But this one is really underpinned by something called the London Protocol, which was originally an IMO piece of legislation about not dumping maritime waste at sea. It was modified over quite a long time, a long negotiation to enable essentially a reliable framework for subsea and subsurface CO2 storage. And that international agreement has underpinned and has allowed these countries to commit to a pan-European CO2 capture and storage model. So that's what provides the stability there. And then you have this open access infrastructure model. Essentially, these CO2 pipes, these CO2 ships and storage are open access. You can, like in oil, gas, electricity, you can buy access and you can buy capacity to store your volume there. So something quite different in terms of the model. And then I'm getting to my last slide ahead of time. A few key takeaways. So there's no one size fits all CCUS policy model. The effectiveness sits upon this spectrum of market-based, incentive-based grants and the likes, all the way across to kind of full public sector. Both can work, but they need to be the policies that underpin them and support them need to be based on a really effective analysis of the specifics of the situation from a technical from a policy, from a government point of view. So a few of the key takeaways. So there's a need to blend these kind of hub-based approaches with sector-specific approaches because cement, steel, and chemicals face quite different emissions profiles and abatement options than where CCS has traditionally been used. Industrial clusters and hubs through policy and public-private partnerships are key. Trying to scale up these hubs to help industrial facilities share the infrastructure, and that shared infrastructure can create the bankable volumes. Cross-border policy frameworks can be key, as we've seen in Northern Europe, by de-risking CCUS and clarifying the rules, which creates, again, a larger market, more volume in order to make bankable investments. The fourth one, financial policy tools that we've traditionally seen, plus blended finance, guarantees, contracts, viability, gap funding, are all still needed to close the investability gap. That hasn't gone away. Fifth, demand creation is essential. So the public sector can step in and mandate public procurement of greener products in order to create the demand and scale decarbonized cement, steel, and chemicals. And then policy and multilateral development bank assistance can be key because they can create these enabling frameworks. They can undertake feasibility studies. They can build and support policy frameworks. They can matchmake across industries, and that can be absolutely key in the early days before larger financial decisions are made between governments and the commercial sector. Thank you very much. Hannah, I'll give you back 1 minute.
Thanks a lot, Justin. What struck me most about your presentation is that as we see technologies evolve, policies are also evolving. So before, policies were focused on subsidies, but now also to encourage better system design. So that's really great. Right, so we have 5 minutes left, not much time, but we will try to do a quick Q&A session. So while we can take in 1 or 2 questions from the audience, and I think we also have a question from WOVA. While you are thinking about your questions, we invite you to please scan the QR code. It's a quick 1-minute survey that will help our team assess the outcomes of this session. And you can also scan the QR codes available on the sides of the rooms. Right? And before you exit the hall, the ushers will ask you as well to take the survey. So you can do it now while sitting or before you go out of the session room. All right. Any questions from the audience? Again, any burning questions? And don't worry about the emissions from these burning questions. We will capture them and utilize them and store them. So I just repeated my joke for those people who weren't here in the morning. All right, no questions? All right, so we'll try to ask the ones from WOVA. I see. All right, it's actually a comment. And I address this to the speakers. Any one of you could raise your hand and answer this. The comment says, CCUS is expensive, mostly investment and operating cost. How to make it economically viable is very challenging. So I know this is the billion-dollar question, right? So what practical steps can governments or private sector, financing institutions, or any other stakeholders can do to help on this? Any takers from our speakers? Debarco, please.
Hello. Yeah, so let me get to the side. Yeah. So I think the question is very pertinent. I tried to cover it a bit in the presentation. So I think it's a mix of multiple factors which has to come to the fore. It's not just subsidies or grants, which at times are very cheap money, and many industries try to just rip off the government at times. It should not be like that. I think there has to be very clear-cut technical assessment to be done with a strong understanding of the economics of the project to see which projects are more or less viable and how little amount of support is required to make the projects actually a real thing on the ground. So one of the factor, for example, in CCU is to look at the transport fuel sector, which I said methanol and SAF, all these things are, because there is a policy support already in the Euro for RFNBO and RCF, which I covered in the presentation. So if the low carbon variant is at least 70% more emissions reduction from the fossil fuel benchmark, then those newer fuels will get the benefit of RFNBO and RCF. That is as per EU RED 3 regulation. So that is one area. But if you ask me, honestly, if you look at the global emissions which is happening, we have to focus more on CCS than on CCU, because CCU can take you only that far, but it will not lead to a massive level of decarbonization which is required. So CCS can do that, but CCS has got different technical challenges, geologic understanding, the seismic understanding, various modeling have to be done. But yes, I think policy has to come in, technology understanding as well as the economic prudence. I think that's, that's a 2-minute answer to the question, but happy to connect more if you want to understand more.
Thank you, Debarco. Any other questions? All right. And I see no more as well in WOVA. So thank you for this session. And thank you, of course, to our speakers for sharing their knowledge and expertise on CCUS. I did learn a lot myself from the presentation. So I'm really excited to continue working in this space, working with you and the audience as well, hopefully in the future. So to officially close our session, let me call on stage Emanuele Bianco, my colleague, energy specialist here at ADB, leading our work on CCUS.
Thank you, Anna, and I'm not going to keep you. I just want to thank you, everyone. Thanks the speakers, thanks the audience. This is a topic that, as the title said, is evolving. We are still seeing all the challenges, but we have a new focus on industry, and ADB is keep doing this work, this important work in the future. We have learned that a pipeline of projects exists, but there are risks to be shared, and there is a need for partnerships. And ADB stands clear in its commitment to continue supporting this partnership, creating this partnership, and supporting the work that is needed in Asia and the Pacific region. So I thank again for everyone. Thanks JFPR for funding this session. And if you have any questions, our doors are open. Thank you so much.